It's not in LinkedIn's best interest to open up APIs. It's not in Facebook's best interest to open up his APIs. People are building competitors. People are working against you. But now with agent mode, we are basically enabling a new API layer of the internet because the AI can basically browse the web as if it's human. This is completely changing the interaction pattern. And this has actually even led to things like Amazon coming out and saying, we're sending a cease and desist to Perplexity because we don't want Comet to run agent mode on our website. I think the issue is how fundamentally it's disrupting the business model of the internet, which is advertising. Advertising is completely based on people seeing things. But if an agent is now seeing things, which is an AI, and it's navigating Amazon to do a product comparison across 3 products or gathering a bunch of reviews for me, that's a dramatic shift. And that means there's a whole bunch of ads that are not being seen, and there's a whole bunch of user analytics that are measuring the wrong way. So you can imagine the next generation of telemetry even segmenting between AI traffic and user traffic.
Welcome to LaunchPod, the show from LogRocket where we sit down with top product and digital leaders. Today, we're joined by serial entrepreneur Raj Singh. His multiple exits have landed him in product leadership roles at companies like Salesforce.com and most currently as a VP of product at Mozilla, where he's leading the team creating new AI products for SMBs. In this episode, Raj shares how his company's navigated multiple pivots with innovations from ChatGPT and Zoom, leading most recently to an acquisition by Mozilla, what makes agentic browsers the next major interface for the web, and how they could change everything from ad models to API access, and why Mozilla's stewardship of Gecko, one of only 3 major browser rendering engines, is essential to keeping the internet open in the age of AI. So here's our episode with Raj Singh. What's up, Raj? How you doing, man? Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Jeff.
We got to meet the other day in San Francisco at dinner. I'm back in Boston though now, but really stoked we got to do that. Thanks for coming on the show. We're going to talk a little bit about what? Agentic browsers, Mozilla, and where it fits into the whole browser ecosystem, building with AI, all sorts of fun entrepreneurial stuff you've done on your end. You're at Mozilla now as a VP of product. Can you just give us like the quick TLDR on how did you get here and what's the background on Raj Singh that we need to know?
Sure. Yeah. I would say my career, has been all startups, and for the most part has been all my own startups, beginning from masters, not finishing it and doing a file sharing company, to my most recent company, which was in the space of meeting summarization that was acquired by Mozilla. I would say thematically, it's been all consumer. I tend to focus on my own pain points. I like to describe my career as a map. I kind of jump around to my own passion projects. That certainly is not probably the most economical or financially rewarding path. You can certainly take more of a ladder career and probably have a much better outcome possibly, but it's been great and I have no reservations, and I've been able to just build a lot of great product.
Yeah. But would you have had more fun? You might have maybe you could do better financially, but would you have had so much fun?
100%. I mean, I think one of the things that's unique is sometimes I tell myself am I unemployable, right? I'm just, because I'm always building from scratch. So
no, I know what you mean. Like you start to get the skill set where it's a very narrow set of things you do very well. To found a company, almost you have to be wide and able to do a lot of things, but at the same time, there's a lot of jobs that might be difficult to do full time. So
absolutely no, and it's different. And and just to be clear, I'm leading obviously a new products team within Mozilla, and I say that half jokingly, but there is some very interesting contrast between sort of new product development and operator kind of work.
Yeah, I mean clearly you're employable because you're employed. So cool. You said you pretty much have constantly just been building your own companies, and yet you are at Mozilla now, which while very technology focused is one of the older kind of stalwarts of modern tech, right? I remember when Firefox came out, it was mind blowing how cool it was to have a new browser option, and all the cool nerd kids I knew were all jumping to it, and the uncool nerd kids like me who were jumping to it too. But like you said, you didn't start out there. You started a company and you got acquired by Mozilla. So maybe jump into that, because I think there's a message everyone needs to hear of like the whole idea of pivoting, and you're never going to have the right idea, or rarely gonna have the right idea right away. So you started out, it was Lentil then Loop, and then the last one was Pulse, all the same company. You ended on meeting summarization, but let's jump into that maybe. Like how'd that start and what was the genesis of that?
I tell people I've not been lucky enough to work on something that just worked on day one. And I do tell people those things do come around. When there's something just working on day one, it's a rocket ship. It doesn't matter what you're doing in that company, get on board. You could be the worst employee in that product, but you're going to see hyper growth, and it's just an experience in itself. My last startup came together was really inspired from some of the stuff I was doing in my startup before that. So, which interestingly was also based on my previous experience. If we go back to like 2009 timeframe, I was doing a lot of outbound partnership type stuff with the stuff I was building. And as part of that, I was meeting operators and handset manufacturers in different countries. And there'd also often be like many people in the room. There'd be a lot of different locations and a lot of different places. You wouldn't know who these people were, right? Like you'd be in a meeting and like, where are all these people? Where am I going next? Et cetera, right? And so I was like, can I build something to help me better prepare for meetings? And I built a calendar company that Salesforce had acquired that was all focused around helping you prepare for that meeting. So Fast forward, if we're going to talk about the last startup, one of the interesting things when I was looking at calendars was we had this slide we'd called the life cycle of a meeting. There was like the 2 weeks before the meeting, just before the meeting, the morning of, a few minutes before the meeting itself, just after the meeting, maybe a week after the meeting. So we had built something called Lentil, which would let you summarize your meeting. It was basically, would listen into the meeting, it would transcribe, and it would summarize. And this was really hard in 2018, 19, pre-LLM era for the most part, right? So we had to basically gather our own data set of meeting transcripts. We had to annotate them using a data annotation team. We were training on a language model, not a large language model, that was called BERT. We would fine tune against it. And then we would basically, there's a whole process, like identify, is this an action item? Is this a question? Different sorts of annotations to try to figure out what was relevant, out of a particular meeting transcript. Transcription at that time was also not very good. It was crazy. Like you had to add punctuation. You couldn't figure out names, right? There was removing pauses and ums and all these sorts of things. And I can't even recall all the different things that we had to do in terms of tactics and strategies and sort of cutting edge research to figure these things out. There's something called diarization, which is like, we take it for granted now, but can you actually break up a transcript by the speaker? Now it's much easier to do. They're multimodal with it, right? They're looking at the voice as well, beyond just sort of the transcript. So we built this, and the end result was the summaries weren't very good. And this is the problem. There was two sides of this issue. One was the summaries were not that good. And two, there was a 2x2 that we built, which is small meetings, like one-on-one meetings versus multi-party meetings, like many-to-many, and then internal meetings and external meetings. And if you think about that, those sort of 4 quadrants, the highest value meeting summary quadrant turned out to be external meetings one-on-one. And why? Because one-on-one meetings tend to be very high value, because there's a lot of information being exchanged versus a meeting with 10 people in there. People describe them as just meeting hell or meeting waste, right? And then external. And why external? Because one-on-one, obviously it's hard to take notes, but external, there's a longer lifetime value of that meeting. I'm collecting a bunch of data and I might not look at that data until 3 months later. Internal meetings, it turns out, one-on-one, sure, but internal many-to-many, there was often a dedicated note taker, and the meetings were often recurring meetings. So the meetings were meaning what was useful this week, by the time we were like 2 weeks from now, it wasn't particularly interesting anymore. Like we've moved on to the next sort of topic. And so we went after the wrong quadrant. This was what I would describe as a segmentation mismatch. We went after the worst of the 4 quadrants, which was many-to-many internal. And I think the mismatch was we were trying to build a tool to replace meeting notes. And really the way we should have positioned it is build a tool to help the person taking notes in the many-to-many internal meeting. So that was kind of a mismatch.
If you're enjoying LaunchPod, the best way you can show support is simple. Follow the show so you never miss an episode, leave us a quick review to help more product leaders find it, and share this episode with a friend or colleague who'd get value from it. Every follow, review, and share really helps us grow.
So fast forward, we built this thing and we're testing it, and I'm not seeing the kind of results that I would like to see. So the nature of all products, and this is what I always tell people, and I've been through so many startups, and as I said, I've never had a startup that worked from day one, is you bet that the team's product intuition can figure it out, right? That's ultimately the bet. Can you pivot? And pivoting is not easy, and I think there's like 2 terms here. I don't know if you've heard the term pivot, and then there's also the term hop, which is sort of like pivot is like change your go-to-market or change your segmentation, but hop is like do something completely different, right? These were not hops, these were pivots, but it's not as easy as it sounds. As the team gets bigger, it's like steering a bigger ship. So it's hard to do. So anyway, so COVID comes as we're testing this thing, and we're like thinking like, okay, how can we sort of pivot? And suddenly video communication collaboration is like the hottest topic, right? Because everybody's working from home, and frankly, at that time, Zoom was great, but not that great. And Hangouts was still terrible, which later became Meet. And Blue Jeans was kind of internal, like conference room only kind of experience. It really wasn't meant for hyper remote. And so all of a sudden we're looking at this and we're like, sometimes the macro conditions enable a certain opportunity, right? So we're like, hey, asynchronous meetings and asynchronous notes is going to be more important than it's ever been now. We have fully distributed teams. People are hiring everywhere. All of a sudden, people are saying remote was the future. It's funny how fast that pendulum has swung. I'm not saying it's not the future, but definitely everybody's RTOing back to the office. Anyway, so we're like, what if we build video communication as well? So we have video communication and we also enable the note taking.
You built your own video meeting software.
Correct. Yeah. And in that stack, it's interesting. And this is a very common product startup mistake. And this is speaking as somebody who's built multiple startups, and I've had multiple, 8-digit exits, like going through this kind of mistake, right? Like you make the same mistakes over and over again. And the issue is what I call, people think of technical debt, but I call it like product debt or sunk cost. We had built all this note-taking stuff, and now we're like pivoting to like, let's do video communication with presence, which is what the virtual office world wanted, or the remote workers wanted, like to kind of be able to, basically what later became Slack huddles. But we wanted to retain all this work we did around meeting summarization notes. It could be useful, like bolted on, but it wasn't core to the new job to be done. The new job to be done was less about note taking. It was more about make it easy to connect and make it easy to see who's online and around. But we kind of kept it there, and it impacts the overall experience. But now there's a maintenance cost, and there's engineers thinking about it, and there's designers thinking about it. It's interesting in that path to find PMF. Sometimes you have to be willing to cut off an arm to kind of figure it out, and then we can reattach it later, right? And so like I think about that and how that added to the complexity of the overall experience when we could have sort of streamlined it. And so eventually we built this video communication experience with presence. So it kind of could tell you who's around at any given time, which is like, you know, kind of Slack and statuses and Teams and statuses were there, but it wasn't fully fleshed out and developed like it is today. And so you kind of sense like who's online, and then I can quickly drop in and have a chat. And so it was really kind of the way people work when they're physically in the office. They kind of like, hey, dude, you got a minute? And they go talk, right? We built this experience and it was well received. I mean, during COVID, everybody was playing with all of these tools, but we fell for another sort of trap, right? And this is something we couldn't have predicted, which is normally when I'm building a startup, I like to think about insertion points. So we're looking for an angle of attack, something that's being ignored by the incumbents. The incumbents being sort of your top 10 hyperscalers, your Fortune, you know, the largest tech companies in the world. Their priority lists are so long, they're ignoring tons of things. And you take that one little thing they're ignoring, it could be a feature of their product, it could be just a space or a segment or an audience or a geography or who knows. And you make that your whole product. And usually you continue to be ignored, and they might even see that you exist, but now you get to 1% market share. Now you get to 2-3% market share. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, we should be doing that. There's something there. They go copy it, right? And at that point, when they start investing in it, counterintuitively actually boosts your growth because they educate the market. And now you're that standalone player and you're growing. So what happened with COVID was video communication collaboration single-handedly became the top 10 priority of every company in tech, right? Apple went all in on like, oh, we got to make FaceTime better and all multi-platform. Facebook even launched the Portal device. They made video like a core piece, like they were like adding video to everything, right?
Zoom got way better,
Zoom
like
substantially improved. Google Meet, honestly, like within a year was a radically different product. Like it was no longer dropping. I mean, it was just insane, the whole thing, right? So what's crazy and fascinating about all of this is it sort of became their top 10 priority. And as a startup that's really early, right? So it depends what stage you're at. If you're kind of already past the threshold, it's just kind of a different game. Like you're kind of like in scaling mode, but you're sort of in the still pre-PMF, early seed sort of phase. That's a very difficult position to be building into a category where you're no longer an insertion point, but you're a frontal assault. And I always tell people frontal assaults rarely work. You can work from a marketing perspective. Like if I want to go and just go heads on and say, we're better than Google Analytics and we're going to replace it, right? Fine. But from a product perspective, it has to have some sort of insertion point. And so this became very challenging because what ultimately happened, and if you look at the category holistically, the incumbents just got bigger, right? Slack launched huddles, Zoom got better, Google Meet got better, and the whole sway of startups in this category ultimately got acquired, didn't make it, right? And so we saw this coming. And so now I had to execute pivot number 2. It sounds easy, but I always tell people when you fundraise, you're typically fundraising for 18 to 24 months. You only have enough time for one pivot. To do 2 pivots is very hard, right? Usually you just don't have the timeline, but you have to have enough conviction to try to pull it off. And it's also hard because when you hire a team or you pull a team together, they're typically hired to build a certain kind of idea. And then when you pivot, it's like, well, that's not really what I joined this for. The mission has changed, or like what we're building is different, right? And so keeping everyone motivated, keeping everyone together, it sounds easy. It is easy when you're 2-3 people, but it gets harder when you're like 8, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 people. You're dealing with emotions. Somebody had mentioned that the best way to sort of evaluate product leaders is to have them talk through pivots and have them talk through shutting down a product because it is so hard. So anyway, so we're there and we said, okay, we're not going to win on video communication. What does our product look like if we drop video communication? And by this point, we had dropped our meeting summarization, right? We wanted to streamline and make the product simple.
So both things were dropped.
Yeah. Now we're like, okay, and so much of product evolution and figuring out product is frankly the negative list, right? The reduction, right? Like how can I reduce, right? People don't think about
what don't we do?
Exactly, right? It's all about removal, right? Removal as a product, removal as a feature. So we said, well, people are using our product because they get presence. But then they're saying the video on Zoom and the video on Hangouts is way better. And we can't build out all those features. We'll just be doing what I call table stakes features and it'd eat up the whole team. And we simply can't compete. So we said, what would our product look like if it was just present? It was just status. It would just tell you who's around, who's available right now, et cetera. We said, well, we probably wouldn't go to market as a standalone product. We'd probably build it as an add-on. So we built this add-on for Slack. And at this point, we renamed the company now Pulse. So or renamed the product, we renamed the company. And we launched Pulse as a add-on for Slack that would just auto update your status. But there's already examples of this. Like Google Calendar now is a plugin. It'll tell you when you're in a meeting. That's like an example of what it would do. But it would do additional things. It would tell you if it was a holiday in your country. It could tell you what time zone it is. It would share that as part of your status. It could tell you if you're in this Google Doc, so other people can see if you're in the same Google Doc. It could tell you if you're coding right now, or you're in focus, or whatever. Like, we made it super intelligent. It could tell you the weather where you live. It could tell you if it was your birthday, whatever you're into. Like, you could control it. The music you're listening to from Pandora. It almost became a cultural building sort of thing, because you could learn about your teammates, actually see when they're around and not disturb them at the right or wrong time. And this worked, right? It started growing on a $3 a month product. Our MMR just completely grew. And it was growing for the most fascinating reason. Companies themselves, and I hate to say it because this is kind of double-edged, we weren't playing on either side. Companies themselves wanted a better sense of what their teams were doing.
Yeah. I remember that discussion of like, are people actually working? That was the big worry all the leaders had at that time was if people are remote and they say they're working, but how do we know?
And a lot of that's anxiety driven, right? And I don't
100%. Yeah.
that, but it didn't help that there was all this press about people being overemployed and having 3 side jobs and all these Reddit forums about how to not get caught. Anyways, so teams or managers or leaders or companies wanted a better sense of what their teams were doing. On the other side, employees wanted more control around their status, right? So for example, I'm in Slack. If I step away for 5 minutes, it has me as missing. Like, I'm not there. And like, no, I'm doing stuff, but I just wanted to go to the bathroom. I work on the weekends. Let me, take an hour to go cut my hair. I don't have any hair. Not a good example, but you get the idea, right? What we did is we had features for both sides. We had enterprise policies, so the enterprise could set up things, but we had things for consumers. Consumers could turn on something like make me always look green. So they're always on my, even when they weren't. So it just went viral and it was growing and it was great. And then what happened was Mozilla, it turns out, was looking for a company to do article summarization. And they came across us and we started chatting and they're like, hey, can you bring this into the browser? Because we want to summarize articles. And it was kind of different to what we were doing now. And we were tired, right? COVID was a very exhausting period. We were all parents. We all had young kids, most of our team. And so that whole combination of thing going through 2 pivots. And so it was an attractive offer and we're like, we got to do this. So we ended up joining Mozilla to bring article summarization into the browser. So we kind of wound down Pulse. We took the stuff that we built previously. Our team was like a machine learning team. And so we started building this out. And then the real irony here, and I always tell people everything's about timing. Within 3 months, ChatGPT or GPT-3 became publicly available, released, whatnot. And everyone's like, dude, this is better. I'm like, yeah, we should use that. And fast forward, now that stuff is all being done using LLMs.
Right. But you're still at Mozilla. And I mean, that's the fun thing, I say fun with, air quotes around it. Fun thing about acquisitions is they're requiring you for, for something, for tech or for people, and usually for tech. But there's always the risk of, or I guess the risk to them, not to you, of some huge function level change in technology that none of us saw. It's funny because ChatGPT 2 had been released. People knew this existed. Like, this was not a secret thing. But then...
Yeah, so 3 different comments there. So 1, technology as a disruption doesn't happen very often. But when that happens, it radically changes everybody.
Disruptive.
I had a board member once that said something along those lines that I thought was really interesting. They said something like, I haven't been lucky to invest on day one into something that was taking off, like that same sort of theme I talked about earlier. But when markets shift or technology shift, I've had teams that can rapidly react to that and recognize like they're now way ahead if they just change their go-to-market, right? So that's sort of interesting. With respect to acquisitions, yes, I like to say there's teams only. That's very common now. In those cases, they're not even company acquisitions. They're probably basically like offer letters out to the teams plus assets. Right. There's team plus tech, right? And then there's sort of like, a strategic acquisition, right? And so definitely all sorts of camps.
But there's no way, I mean, it's funny because GPT-2 existed. It was fairly public.
Oh yeah, no. And with respect,
it wasn't that interesting. But 3 came out was just like mind blowing, and like you said, changed the game there.
What's interesting about that too is they just threw more money at the problem. It wasn't fundamental technical architectural improvement. They just simply threw more compute. And actually, in some ways, that is what's fueling the race today, because people don't know if there's going to be suddenly another step function or breakout if we just throw more compute.
Well, it's been this whole post. I mean, we're getting a little off topic, but this is fine. Like the whole AI post AI world, I feel like one of the most interesting things has been this kind of just surprise breakout function increase that happens almost seemingly randomly at times where GPT-3 came out and that was just overnight, the world was different. But even within companies, I've seen companies, we built something internally that was using GPT, like a chat layer in the product. And I was against the idea. We do an analytics tool and session replay and all that kind of stuff. And we'd been using AI to watch the sessions, but people had in their mind that need like a chat layer. And I was like, do not build another freaking chat to chart analytics tool. That's a solution without a problem. And so we'd been working on this chat, and the chat was just kind of wasn't great. It was internal only. And I went on vacation with my family. I took 4 days off and I was still on Slack almost every day. Came back and it worked in this incredibly different way where it triggered the session watching agent to watch sessions for you and explain what was going on. And it was incredibly powerful. I watched like 24 hours of sessions in 5 seconds. The findings it was spitting out when I asked it to like look at our like AdWords landing pages were often better than like senior level people I had employed to run that function for me. And that was like a 4-day difference. But like you said, it was just like, in their case, they threw money at GPT-2 for GPT-3, but it is just sometimes these like unexpected jumps that do that. And, that happened. GPT-3, they no longer needed summarization at Mozilla.
Yeah, I always say when it comes to dashboards, like they're not actionable. Like we need action, right? Make actions. And so I think the key thing you're really highlighting, and this is like a big issue in the quantified self universe, right? All these things telling you your heart rate over time or telling you whatever, some interesting stat or whatnot. It's not telling me the action. Like what's the action I need to take? So I think,
do I need to exercise more or do I need to
whatever it is, right? But I think that's pretty cracked here. And I think that's great.
So curious, like fairly recently, OpenAI released their browser. There's Strawberry, there's Perplexity has one. These are coming out left and right. And just kind of curious to get your take. Do you think this is the interface AI is going to, like, we've had these like chat windows for a long time and now it's API based. Is the browser going to be I don't know. I feel like a lot of people haven't found great uses for it yet, aside from it's just cool. But what's your take on like agentic browsers as a totality and what's going on here?
Chat was always a modality, but open-ended chat in this way, I mean, this is incredible, right? Like for the first time, it's good enough that people feel that they can express whatever creative ideas they have and get the result they want and have communication, collaborate, whatnot, right? This is the new interface for the web. And if you think about a lot of AI applications in the past or anything that had suggestions, recommendations, they might have an open-ended interface, but they would often suggest things to ask, like they'd have a button click here, or they'd build wizard workflows for those common tasks. But we're hitting a point now where chat is so good. I think early when ChatGPT was released, there were some questions on like, would this become the standard UI to everything? But it's very plausible it could become the standard UI to everything. And I'm already seeing that sort of behavior where you enter a travel site. Do I really need to navigate all these things on the left between the hundreds of options and airlines and times, or can I just chat with it and have it like show me recommendations as I continue to chat, right? And so I think all of that's very sort of interesting, chat as a modality. Now, agentic browser, yes, it's a little bit of a wild, wild west right now. Like people don't know what's going to take off. And so there's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of A/B testing happening. People are going down different tracks. We're seeing a lot of money being spent. I mean, this whole industry, if you just follow the money, fascinating, right? Nobody's really contribution margin positive here or EBITDA positive. Like everybody is like massively underwater from a gross margin perspective. I think the reason is because of all this experimentation. And I think people are trying to figure out what's going to work. I think the reason it's also important is the browser itself is probably going to be the interface of the next generation of software. I mean, it's always been that way, right? The web, increasingly we spend more and more time on the web, and the computers themselves are basically just a browser, the whole premise of the Chromebook. But it's also a source of incredible intent data. It's where you consume information. It's where you spend your time. It's where you go to different destinations, whatnot. And all of that data is building a increasingly personalized understanding of you. And if you look at what is lock-in and retention and why these different AI chat apps are showing smile curves, which are so rare from a retention curve perspective, is in part because it's learning, not learning in the sense that it's like getting smarter, but it's learning because it has memory and it knows who you are. And so it can then tailor its response better to you and in a more personalized way. And I think that's all very sort of incredible and powerful. So we're seeing a lot of activity, whether it's OpenAI with the Atlas browser, whether it's Perplexity with Comet. Obviously, we're doing stuff there as Mozilla, Chrome, Edge, whatever. I like to say browsers has been a relatively boring space for a long time. I mean, outside of the Chrome, most people would not have been able to tell the difference between most browsers, but suddenly it's like one of the hottest categories. And I think that's for due reason, because this is a new surface everyone's competing on. And one of the fascinating things I should also call out, this whole notion of agent mode or operator mode, we've seen since Web 2, where we basically opened up all APIs, the internet become increasingly closed. Obviously, it's accelerated now with LLMs indexing the whole internet, but APIs have been closed, right? Because it's not in LinkedIn's best interest to open up APIs. It's not in Facebook's best interest to open up as APIs. People are building competitors. People are working against you. But now with agent mode, we are basically enabling a new API layer of the internet, because the AI can basically browse the web as if it's human. And so this is incredible, because this is completely changing the interaction pattern. And this has actually even led to things like Amazon coming out and saying, we're sending a cease and desist to Perplexity because we don't want Comet to run agent mode on our website.
I'm still curious how that's going to work. Like, I get they could have a judgment against it, but maybe there's like behavior patterns or something that are telltale signs. But AI is just going to keep getting better on web action and stuff like that. How do you eventually even police that?
I don't know
If
how
they,
they're gonna. I don't think they
yeah,
have a way to really block it outside of sort of this legal perspective because it is the
yeah,
end user's browser,
right.
right? No, it's like the consumer is choosing to do this. I think the issue is how fundamentally it's disrupting the business model of the internet, which is advertising, right? And advertising is completely based on people seeing things. But if an agent is now seeing things, which is an AI, and it's navigating Amazon to do a product comparison across 3 products or looking at a range of things and like gathering a bunch of reviews for me, that's a dramatic shift in how I'm interacting with Amazon. And that means there's a whole bunch of ads that are not being seen and there's a whole bunch of user analytics that are measuring the wrong way, right? And so you can imagine the next generation of telemetry even segmenting between AI traffic and user traffic.
Or the other piece is data scraping, right? I work in marketing, so there's a lot of these pieces that I keep up with, even if I'm not doing some of the stuff you're not supposed to. You see it and you read about it, and there was a bunch of companies on LinkedIn that basically made their entire operating principle scraping data from LinkedIn, right? And reselling it. And then they basically got caught and LinkedIn cracked down on that and put the
Yeah.
kibosh on them. And you can see this over time where like you couldn't use Chrome extensions to pull data and export it out of a window from Chrome, and all that stuff wouldn't work on LinkedIn. But then people started to find ways around it and do that and da da da. But like, how do you stop it when it's just the agent just running in the browser and it looks like a human doing it? Like,
Yeah, historically, the way a lot of these companies were doing it was through headless browsers in the cloud, and so it was much
yeah,
easier to stop, right? It was clearly a
right.
violation of the
That's
term,
identifiable right there.
right? It's like
Yeah.
through it. Yeah, it's exactly. But now it's running locally on the desktop. I think this is kind of fighting a trend. This is like Blockbuster fighting Netflix or whatnot, or Kodak fighting digital, right? Like it's not going to happen. So I think this is the way things are going. I think the real issue is a lot of these companies, particularly web publishers, have to rethink like what this new model looks like. Is it an ad supported business model? Because from a publisher perspective, how do I react? Like, do I just become a provider of data and the aggregation layer, like AI chat's the aggregation layer, and you view and consume through that, or am I still a destination, right? And what's that business model going to look like? So it's all very scary. And then you have things like MCPs, which are basically unstructured APIs, is a way to think about it, right? I like to call it that because I think it's just easier to understand. And so now I can basically ask a site for something and it will figure out what APIs to call to give me that, right? And so I think this whole universe is all very fascinating. It's all very transformational. I don't think anybody can predict it, but I think this is why everybody's playing on every surface. And I also think this is why so much money is being spent, unclear on how to cover the cost of all this operational spend, the hundreds of millions that are being spent in inferences for the browser.
Right. And then it's kind of an interesting thing because it brings a world where, for a long time, like you said, browser was kind of an uninteresting area of technological innovation. And now it brings browser back to the front. But at heart, there's only so many rendering engines that exist. There's only like so many flavors of a lot of these things. I don't think people realize how probably much more like influence Mozilla has had in some of these things than people realize, because there's only a few players who are really operating at some of these levels. It gives you guys, really good insight probably into what's going on. Or I guess, does it?
The ecosystem has been consolidating for good or for bad, right? So if you look at like Edge, you look at Brave, you look at Opera, these are all based on Chromium, right? So Chromium is one of the major rendering engines. Then you have WebKit, which is from Apple, which is Safari, right? And then you have Gecko, which is Firefox. And that's it. I mean, those are really the 3 main rendering engines of the internet. And because 2 of them are basically, hyperscalers, super large companies, we're kind of the check and balance, right? We're the ones who are thinking about the user, thinking privacy centric, thinking about what's best. We kind of play that third party. And because we are one of the major rendering engines, we're one of the 3, even though our market share might be at 4 or 5%, we have a seat at the table. When it comes to web standards meetings and JavaScript and the future of CSS and things like that, we're there because we are one of the major rendering engines, right? And so what we don't want is a world where everyone consolidates to Chrome and then they start building their own proprietary markup and language and whatnot, whatever you want to call it, which gives them advantages and effectively monopolizes their control of the future of the web. And so in many ways, I consider Mozilla and Firefox as an existential reason that it needs to exist.
Anyone who's done marketing, you have like 30 different standards you have to pay attention to for email. If you're going to do any HTML email, there's like 30 different things you have to test it on first to make sure it's going to work, which is good in not in a good way, or it's bad in that it's really complex, but it's good in that there's no one player who can really make a huge change and change the whole paradigm. It's going to be, pretty open. And that's a piece I didn't realize about Mozilla, and makes a good point about like it being central to, so use Mozilla, everyone, and keep the internet open.
We obviously, as you can imagine, as we're thinking about AI and browsers, we're thinking about how we can do this in the most privacy sensitive way,
right,
and most user friendly way, and things like that.
and
We're not trying to train and collect on all your data.
yeah, exactly. Whether or not Mozilla is thinking about, an agentic browser, I know you're working on Solo now over there, which is kind of a set of tools for solopreneurs and the end of it. But no matter what you're thinking about, what you're building, if you're working with AI, it starts to get into, I think everyone talks about like, what's the quality of token, what is the best token, and that's the AI you want to use. But from a product building standpoint, that's really not true. And I know we don't have a ton of time to go through this, but there's a lot more to think about when you're building AI into your actual product, whether it be a browser or whether it be software or whatever you're doing, than just who has the best token, right?
100%. Yeah. So I don't look at it like that. So I sort of say
Yeah.
like best token is my euphemism or analog for basically
Right.
best AI, right? But there's two other parameters that are critical, which is one, speed, right? So the speed of inference. Certain distilled models run a lot faster. Or
Yeah.
if you're running them on LPU inference focused clouds like Grok or Cerebras, you're getting, more tokens per second or whatever the benchmark is, right? So there's speed and then there's cost. Some LLMs are just more compute intensive, right? Like they're a lot of parameters or whatever it is, right? Or whatever API interface, right? And then there's longer tail things too that might matter, particularly as you think about browser and the amount of context, like size of context window and things like that. But for the most part, those are all at a level that they're sufficient. So I really think of those three parameters, cost, speed, and the quality of the token, as what really influences how you select and how you decide what AI to use. And that's why we're seeing so many of these AI coding tools like Cursor or whatnot. They might be training their own vertical models or using lightweight things here, right? They're doing some level of orchestration so they can optimize on either speed or optimize on cost, or they can optimize on output.
Yeah. I mean, what was it? Cursor just, I think, released their own model actually.
Yeah.
But you have to be in Cursor to use it. So I think that was a big pushback people had, was they want to use the API. But even, right, if you look at applications, it's going to start making sense for certain things that you're going to want to have the application actually push and host a slimmed down version of one of these models, maybe on the client side or something. So you're not spending the API cost to like ping it constantly. There's a lot of different things you can do here that people need to think about. Unfortunately, this is probably a whole topic unto itself. But speaking of Mozilla, can't steal your entire day as much as I would like to, but I appreciate you coming on. This is super, interesting, super good insight. I'd love to have you back on again soon. Hopefully we can go down more of these rabbit holes, but appreciate the time, man. It was great catching up again, and hopefully see you soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah. Lots of deep topics. This is such an exciting space.
There's, like you said, there's a lot going on in this space and it changes every day. So, all right, have a good weekend. Good to see you, and hopefully talk again soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.